Today I'm here with Shayla Eagan. She has an incredible page that I was checking out, and thanks to my friend Shanna Leroy, shout out to Shanna. She's like, you got to go check her out. And I looked at your stuff, and you just have this wealth of knowledge in so many areas that when we were messaging, I was like, I don't know which route I should even take this, but you've kind of become well known as someone who teaches others how to prepare for things.
Yeah.
And I want to go into that because that's something that's fascinating to me too, and something I actually really do need to learn. But there was a story we were just talking about. We were talking about your running experience. We were talking about all this stuff I don't know anything about that I would like to. But we talked about your daughter who had this injury and all the stuff that's happened. Do you mind sharing that really quick before we go into the other stuff?
Oh, totally. I mean, I have the short version and I have a long version.
You just share. You can even share the long one because I can always take out whatever we don't.
Well,
use.
I like to use this towards like even my spiritual preparedness because like on my page I teach about temporal and spiritual, and I feel like they go hand in hand in a lot of things.
Can you explain what that is? Like,
okay, so temporal preparedness is like something with like food storage. It's physical things. So it's like water storage, 72-hour kits, sanitation.
Like if there's an earthquake or something.
Yes, if there's a natural disaster, if someone has a job loss, if it's, it's just when there is a emergency in life that you need to use these things. And then there's spiritual preparedness. And spiritual preparedness is for people who want to grow closer to God and Jesus Christ. And so I help them teach them how to grow closer to Jesus Christ by spiritual journaling and by reading scriptures and just doing something that brings you closer to Jesus Christ.
Okay, so why does that matter? Sorry, I wasn't planning on going right into that, but like why does that matter? Okay, so I'm thinking in terms of like everyone can understand the temporal preparedness, like if there's an earthquake or if there's whatever, but why would someone, like, give me a scenario where someone would need to be spiritually prepared for something?
Okay, so we can even dive into this with what happened to my daughter.
Yeah, let's do that.
So spiritual preparedness is for everyday life and it's for everyday hardship. Sometimes life is a bliss and everything's going perfect. You have your busy life, and then sometimes it's disrupted by something, and it could be from a job loss. It could be losing somebody close to you. It could be sickness. It could be anything. And I teach people to prepare now, because when those hardship comes, it comes out of nowhere and it's scary, and you need something to hold close to during those hard times. So this happened back in 2020. And
everything happened in 2020.
I had a baby in 2020.
Oh, I did too. Oh,
I just feel like 2020 was crazy.
So hard.
And so I had a baby in September, and she was like a surprise baby too. So that was fun.
Yep.
And at the time, I remember I was tired and I was nursing, and my 4-year-old came into my room and was like, "Mom, I want to go outside and play with friends." And I was like, "Oh, okay, get out of here." We live on top of a circle in a cul-de-sac, so it feels really safe. My kids go play out in the front all the time. So she's out there it was maybe just 5 to 10 minutes tops. And she comes running in and she's crying and she's like, "Mom, I got hurt." And I was like, "Oh, what's the matter?" And she was like, "I bumped my head." And so I look around her head and everything looks fine. I checked her eyes, but she's devastated. She's crying pretty hard. And I'm like, "Well, what did you do?" And she couldn't really remember. And so she falls asleep. And I thought, that's okay. Like, she's distraught. Like little kids, sometimes they cry themselves to sleep.
She like bumped her knee or something.
And so then she wakes back up about an hour later and she goes, "Oh, Mom, my head hurts." And so I look around her head, don't see anything. And I was like, "Let's just get you some medicine." So I give her some medicine. 20 minutes go by and she's like, "Mom, my head is hurting so bad."
And she's how old again?
4.
Oh.
And so I was like, "Okay." I was like, "Can you tell me where it hurts?" And she points to the behind her ear. So I like lift up her hair and there's this bubble. And I didn't see it at the time because, she has long, flowy hair and it was clear, but it was filled with fluid. You just couldn't, it's almost naked to the eye, but when you touched it, it was very soft but gooey. Oh. So I showed the bump to my husband, and my husband immediately was like, "Yeah, let's get her in to the doctor." And this is the day before Thanksgiving. And it's about 7:00 at night. So we're like, is there a place open the day before Thanksgiving? And luckily, our pediatrician had a late night. opening. And so they were like, oh, we can quickly get you in. So I drive her over, and while I'm driving, I call my neighbor and I said, we are trying to figure out how Isla got hurt. Can you tell me? And she goes, oh, yeah. She's like, my daughter said she saw Isla scootering and she slipped and hit her head on the curb and then laid there. So they thought, the kids thought she was laying there crying, but what happened is she was knocked out and she didn't have a helmet on. And so, but then she got up, they said probably a minute later, and just ran inside. So they didn't think much of it. These are little kids, you know, so they don't understand what's happening. And so I take her to the doctor. He checks her ears, checks her eyes. And he's like, you know, I know she has this bump, but I think she's going to be okay. Just make sure if she throws up, maybe give me a call. And so we start walking out, and we have face masks on, and she just starts throwing up right as I open the door.
I'm so glad she did it right there.
I know. Well, I feel like that's the small miracle right there, was
Huge.
like, if I was driving or going home, I would have had to find a way to get back in there because they were closing up. And I turned, and the nurses are running to the doctor, and the doctor's running out, and he goes, oh, don't worry. It's only one. It's only one. But then she continues, and he goes, let me make a few calls. He comes back and he goes, the doctors told me to send her home. But if it was my child, I would send her in to the ER as soon as possible. And I felt like he almost felt prompted to say that. And
totally, he
told me directly, he goes, you either go to primaries or you go to Utah Valley. Don't go anywhere else. And so luckily, we don't live too far from Utah Valley. So that was the place we went to. And he called ahead. So we got right in. We go into the doctor, and he checks her ears, and he goes, there's some blood behind her eardrum. Can you, is it okay if we do a CT scan? And I was like, yeah, of course. Like whatever you need. And he takes her back, does a CT scan. And by then she is like exhausted. And she's like, Mom, I want to go home.
Yeah, she's 4. That's so sad.
Like it's just, and you know, I'm talking to her and I'm like, okay, well, we're almost done. And the doctor comes in with, this woman, and he sits me down and he goes, sorry, I get emotional about this, but he goes, your daughter has bleeding in the brain. And what happened is when she fell, she cracked her skull. And it's bleeding in the brain and it's putting pressure on it. And he goes, so we're going to have to life flight her to Primary Children's. And I couldn't go with her on the life flight because of COVID restrictions. And so
2020.
He then turned to this lady and he goes, this is a grievance counselor. And he's like, because we don't think she's going to make it through the night. And he goes, we have our best neurologists that are going to be there, but we just don't know.
Wait, hold on. They're telling you can't go with her, and they're also telling you she's not going to make it through the night.
Yes. And it was devastating to hear that, because I had a friend recently, but during that time, that lost a son to the same thing, and he died on the helicopter ride. And so you can tell, and he was only 2. And so it was like traumatizing going there. I luckily picked up my husband and I met on the way. We drove up to Primaries, and we walk in, and a nurse is like, oh, I'm sorry, only one parent is allowed in here. And luckily a team of neurologists were there, and they're like, no, you can send both of them in. And so
what month in 2020 was this?
November.
Okay, so that would have made me so mad. It's like, okay, we understand this a little better now. This is not like March or April.
No, and I think I was like kind of like all over the place too, because I just had a baby. And so I felt like my hormones were just
an
everywhere.
Election season going on.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. The craziest times. And so my husband stayed with her through the night. They were going to do cognitive tests. And that is where she sleeps, and then they'll wake her up, and she has to do like hand movement, talking to them in certain ways. And they just kind of watch that and see how she does. And then they said, in the morning, they're going to do a CT scan. And then if it doesn't like heal or get better, they're going to have to put her into surgery and remove part of her skull to relieve that part of the brain. And my husband stayed while I went home, because I'm nursing a baby. So I had to be home while he was there. And it was just
torture.
Yes. And I remember that morning I was in my bathroom, and I was just on my hands and knees crying to God, saying, please, please save my child. Please save her. I mean, I think it was all my heart and might. And it's like in those moments where there's nothing you can do. You know, you're giving everything to God and saying, I'm giving this burden to you.
And no one can fix that but him.
Yes, exactly. And so I remember then my husband called me right after that, and he's crying on the phone, and he goes, it's a miracle. They said her brain and the blood is almost straight up from what they saw. They said she is literally a walking miracle. They've never seen something like that happen. And so we spent Thanksgiving at Primary Children's, but separated because, you know, only one person was allowed in at a time. And then 2 days later, she came home. And then we came home to the most wonderful Ward family that they cooked us up a wonderful Thanksgiving meal. They all
because I forgot this was the day before Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And so we were all separated and we didn't spend Thanksgiving, and my kids were like all sad about it. They're like, Mom, why didn't we get Thanksgiving? And I was like, well, we already got our Thanksgiving miracle.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was just like, I saw God's hand in that miracle, but I even saw even more when I saw neighbors get together and they individually cooked. I mean, it's a full meal. They had a full turkey and stuffing and potatoes and dessert. And then all the kids in the neighborhood colored pictures for her. Oh. And I remember right there thinking, this is what Zion is. Mm-hmm. This is what God wants for us, is to be together forever and live in harmony. And I've never forgotten that. And so when I have, you know, started teaching spiritual preparedness, I tell them, you will get in these moments where you can't do anything. You have to rely on God. And I know not everyone gets that miracle, but if we yoke ourselves unto God and to Christ, it will make those burdens lighter.
It really does. That's so beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. That was hard even for me to hear. I can't imagine being the one to have to share that. But something you were saying, like, that hit me so hard was like when you guys came home, and I don't even know the details of how people in your ward, which is like, you know, your congregation, how they already knew that, like how they already knew things were going on. But I will say, having been in those, you know, similar situations, say what you want about the LDS church, say what you think about this or about that, but oh my goodness, when, you know, crap hits the fan, they take care of you.
Oh, they do.
That community, I mean, they come together, and they I mean, I've had people show up at my house and they're cleaning, taking care of kids, making food, doing all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, I don't even know you knew I was having whatever issue at the time, you know?
Yeah, they're literally like family.
Yeah.
I call them my ward family, and they do these things and they don't expect anything out of it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's incredible to, especially in my area, I feel so fortunate to have such wonderful neighbors that they just almost know, right?
Yeah.
I think you probably feel the same way, where they just like, they minister to you and they just say, hey, you know, I noticed you were having a hard day. What can I do for you today?
Yeah.
And it's those things that I think can really uplift a person.
Yeah.
Even during our time. My friend, Kelsey, her husband passed away from cancer about a year ago. And she can tell you stories of just the miracles that she sees in her neighbors. When she came home, it was about a few days after her husband's funeral, that her neighbors came and they mowed her lawn and they planted flowers, and they still come and do those things a year later because they know that was important to her husband and they don't expect anything out of it. It's incredible.
That is incredible, and it's so beautiful. And I bet we each have 150 stories just like that. Like it's almost like you kind of come to expect it. I'm going through a hard time. That's all I got to say.
Yeah.
And then people show up and they are there. And then you've probably also been the person who's shown up.
Oh yeah.
When, you know, like several times when
and I feel like I need to be on that like times 10 sometimes because after what happened to me, it's funny. After that happened to me, I remember praying and I was like, Heavenly Father, how can I repay you in this? Like, I just feel so overwhelmed. And within like 2 weeks, I was called as our ward's compassionate service leader.
He's
and
like,
that's
here's how.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was in charge of helping people in our neighborhood. Now, these are just members of the church. They're people from all religions that live in our area, that we would bring them meals if they have kids, or help them move if they were moving. Like, we were always constantly helping.
Wow.
And that I felt like for me, I was able to give back with that. So,
well, and you give back in so many ways too, because when I was looking at your Instagram, you're like just giving your time, energy, effort to teach people, which is amazing. Okay. So tell me about like temporal preparedness. And I'm super interested in this. Like, I'll show you after this, but our pantry's like right around the corner. We have 6 children and you've got 4. So it's not like we're small families, you know, and you just never know. I mean, we always think earthquake or something. No one ever in a million years saw 2020 coming. Like,
no.
I actually felt so blessed that I was about to have a baby. Like, I had a baby and then 3 weeks later they locked down everything. Like, because it was February of 2020, you know? Yeah. And I had already, because I didn't want to have to go grocery shopping with a new baby, so I had loaded up on everything. And so I felt so blessed that I have that situation. But you never know what's going to happen. Yeah. And so, I mean, we load up on everything now. Like, we are so prepared, but I do need more of a system. And when I was looking at your stuff, I was like, wow, you've got it down pat. You've got it so organized. You need this much of this. Don't buy this because it's this. And anyway, tell me kind of the basics for someone who's just starting out.
Oh, well, it's so interesting that you said that too. Cause like in 2020, my husband and I, we recently moved into our house, and I remember I didn't have any food storage at the time because we moved a few times. We were in New Mexico, and then we moved to my husband's parents' house while we were looking for a house. So we were just recently moved in, and I remember thinking like, oh gosh, if something happens, I don't have anything. And all of a sudden, I think it was December of 2019, I got the strongest feeling to go to the store and buy sanitation stuff, medicine, and food.
Wow. And all those were gone.
Yes. And my husband was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I just feel like I need to get this. And he's like, okay. Like, he was on board. And I have this picture of me, and my grocery cart is like filled to the brim. But it was only like a few weeks later where the world shut down. And I was like, okay, well, I'm glad that I've got that feeling and prompting to gather stuff. And so and I've always learned temporal preparedness stuff. My parents were preppers. My grandparents were preppers. And so I've always known about preparedness. And I know a lot of people are like, something bad happens, I'll go to my parents. Like, it's fine.
Like, what if you can't get there?
Oh, I know, right? And so I just tell people, because sometimes temporal preparedness can get expensive, right? And people think they'll go into like a food storage type of place and they'll say, hey, this is a year's worth and this is for per person. And they just see money signs. They're just like, oh, this is so expensive, especially if you have 8 people in your family. It's expensive. Yeah. And so people come to me and they're like, what do you do with that? And I said, you don't need to get it all at once. Start slow. Yeah. So like, if you go to the store, each time you go, grab something, either a canned food, a bag of rice, some bottled water. And eventually, as you keep doing that, it will build. And then I tell people to don't buy things that you will not eat. I don't care if it's on sale. Yeah. You're not going to eat it.
We learned that the hard way. We threw away tons of food. I'm like, that was so much money.
I know. It really is. And people even too don't realize that, like, they'll throw away their honey and their canned food. And I'm like, honey doesn't expire. Canned food, there's a Best Buy, but it doesn't expire.
See, I just threw away honey. I wish I would have known that.
No, yeah, it does. It can harden and crystallize, but it's good indefinitely. It always stays good. So keep the honey, keep the canned goods. Like, if you watch like End of the World type of shows, what are they always eating? Canned goods. And it's because there's a Best Buy, and yes, I would prefer if people would rotate, but don't fret if it's expired because it's still good. Really? So, yeah. Isn't that so interesting? I just
gave away a ton too.
Well, there you go. I mean, it's good to rotate. I tell people to rotate because you don't want to be sitting there and eating a 10-year expired can of tuna.
That sounds so disgusting.
I know.
Have you ever found yourself in like an emergency situation? Like, I mean, like an earthquake or anything like that?
I haven't, but I've had a moment where my husband lost his job, and it was
Oh,
crazy.
yeah. That's, yeah.
Yeah, and see, a lot of people when they think of preppers, they're like doomsdayers,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Well, also
end of
there's
the
some weird
world.
negative connotation on some recent news things with some like over the top weird preppers, but that's not that's not what we're talking about.
No, not at all. Like, I feel like preparing for everyday life and unexpected things. And we did not expect my husband to lose his job because at the time we just recently moved. They rehired him. He was only there for 2 months. And then they're all like, oh, okay. And we're letting this whole department go. And he's like, what? And so we had to find ways to live on our storage, but we had money saved. We had food storage and we were okay. And then he was able to find a job. And it's those everyday things that you prepare for.
Yeah.
And with the economy where it is right now, inflation, having that extra food storage when money is tight or there's a job loss or anything like that, it's great.
Yeah.
And but there's people I know that live in Florida, right, and Texas, and they have natural disasters all the time.
I always wonder that every time I see it on the news, I'm like, didn't you know this was coming? It happens like every year.
Yeah, and there's like, there's hurricanes, there's tornadoes,
I
and
should be more compassionate. Sorry. I'm just like,
well,
why does anyone live there? I don't know.
oh, I know it's crazy, but they know how to prepare for these things, and I'm like, see, we're not crazy preppers. We're just preparing for something to happen. Like here in Utah, we are prone to have an earthquake. And so that's what I have been focusing on in my preps is like, okay, if there was an earthquake, what would our family do?
You have
What
like
is
the
our family
72-hour bag thing.
Mm-hmm.
I need to really like, is there do you have like a little like link or anything on your page that shows like what stuff
I
to
have
pack for that?
highlights on my bubble
You do?
highlights. I
Okay.
have signed targets, and I will personally go through and say, okay, this is what you need. This is what I do, and this is what you can do as for your family. Because there's things that work for my family, but everyone's family is different. People have allergies, kids with disabilities, different age groups, and so I try to make sure there's a range, right? Like, okay, like I make sure there's a first aid kit. I'm like, okay, but if your kid is severely allergic to something, make sure you have an EpiPen, right? Yeah. Or if your kid can't eat certain things or your diet's different. Like my kids love goldfish. My kids will eat goldfish. Yeah. But some other people are like, oh, that's not in my diet or that's not what we eat. And it's like, fine, that's great. You go over here and get this type of food.
What about, do you leave anything in your car in case?
I do. I have waters. Because, well, I noticed this winter, we get very heavy snow, right? And there's a lot of people that get snow. But there were times where people got stuck in their cars, so they froze to death. Oh. And so in my cars, like in winter, I'm like, I have extra blankets. I have waters. And what you do with your waters, you keep it in a small cooler because it keeps them from freezing solid. But then if you have them in the summer, it keeps them cool. So no matter what, the waters will stay good.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you a story that's going to make you cringe because you're so good at like being prepared and stuff. This just happened a few weeks ago. John, I was starting to tell you about this, but oh my gosh, we were in the middle of nowhere. Like, and when I say that, I don't mean it like, oh, we were just in the mountains a few miles from the road. We were in the middle of the Canadian Rockies in a certain place that you can only get to through a floater plane or a 9-hour boat ride. And we're like, I don't hike. I'm not even a hiker. Like it's fun if I'm doing like a light hike and then I can go home and like be normal. Yeah. My husband somehow convinced me to do this hike. We were not prepared at all. We somehow missed the sign that says this is extremely treacherous and there's no path and you're basically on your own. Don't do it. Basically the same. Actually, the word was hazardous. It was like extremely hazardous. I never saw that sign, but we were like, yeah, let's do it. We'll be up and back in an hour. It is like the thickest terrain you have ever seen in your entire life. I don't know. It was really embarrassing. Long story short, I won't give you all the details. It's really embarrassing. Like, we were not prepared at all. We brought 5 normal sized bottles of water, just like this, you know? Yeah. Because we thought we'd be up and back in an hour. So we each had one and we drank it all because it was miserable. And I'm talking, we're on hands and knees, like vertical. Oh my gosh. And I'm not a hiker. And there's an analogy in this because when we first pulled up the ship, there's on the shore the most gorgeous waterfall you've ever seen. And this ties into your spiritual preparedness too. And we decided, let's go hike to see this other waterfall, which when we got up there, was such crap. It was nothing compared to the one at the beginning. And we sat there, and I even said to my friend Carrie, I was like, do you want to take a picture? And she goes, like, she was
Like,
so
no.
mad. We're covered in sweat and mud, and it was so much effort. Okay, sorry, I will wrap this up. And then we start heading down, but we quickly realize we are not on whatever shred of a path we thought we were. And when I say it is thick, I took a quick video as I was sobbing when we were stuck up there. Like, you can't even see. She was as far away from me as you are. I couldn't even see her because there's so much brush.
It's just so thick.
It is the thickest. And we were like crawling on this log. I don't know why we thought we were somehow on this path. Anyway, we're crawling on this log, and I'm like, I can't crawl on this log anymore. I'm going to like put my foot down, and my foot would punch through, and there's drops everywhere. Like drops everywhere. There's a 3,000 foot, we looked this all up later, a 3,000 foot cliff right here. It was so stupid. And but the good news is, so our phones didn't work, but we had a radio down to the ship, because the other four there's like 8 of us total, but the other 4 were smart enough to not do this hike. And so we kept radioing, and finally we're like, we are lost. Like we're panicking now. Like, we're lost. We need some help.
Yeah.
And so they try to go like contact any sort of like park ranger, couldn't get a hold of anyone. And they just kept honking the horn. It's this big, huge ship, you know?
Yeah.
And so, and we would hear it, but we couldn't quite figure out our bearings. It was so hard. I later learned, this is, anyone who even hikes a little bit knows this. You're supposed to use this app called All Trails or something.
Yep.
I learned that on the hike. I had never even heard of that. Like, I sound so stupid because it was so stupid. And I finally am like, you guys, like, we need to stop and say a prayer, because we realize now we've been 45 minutes off the hike. By the way, we had an hour and a half left of sunlight.
Oh my goodness.
An hour and a half, and we knew that we're on the trail. It takes 2 hours. We learned the hard way to get back to the ship. So we're like, we're gonna have to spend the night here, and this area is known for grizzly bears, whatever. Anyway, and so we say a prayer, and then I said to my husband Sean and to the other guy Jason, like, we need a radio down to the ship for them to pray for us. Like, we're really stuck. Like, it was becoming a real panic situation. Yeah. And they looked at each other. They're like, Christina, we don't want to tell you, but the radio fell down the mountain.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I'm really like, I'm praying now. Like, it takes a lot to get me to the point of full-blown panic, but I was feeling myself having a panic attack where I'm like, I can't even breathe. Yeah. And I'm like, I just kept praying, Heavenly Father, please help me have faith. Please help me have, please bless us with a miracle. Like, please help us. We can't, we were trying to figure out how we're going to stay the night there, because there's no flat place to even lay. I mean, we had been crawling like down now on hands and knees. Like, we're like, what are we even going to do? We can't even crawl back up because there's not enough light to even find a trail again. And we didn't even know where the trail was. Like, we were so off course. And right after we say this prayer, we heard something, and I'm part deaf. And so like, I was like, I don't know if that was anything, but my friend Carrie, she was, no, I heard something. So she climbs up again a little bit just to see what she can hear. And she heard someone off in the distance, and she's like, hey, and starts yelling to them. Long story short, we were rescued 5.5 hours later.
Oh my goodness.
I'm so embarrassed of this stupid story, but it was like a full-blown panic. But it made me think, like, why do stuff like this without being prepared? But even everyday life, you don't know what's going to happen.
Oh, 100%.
Both spiritual or temporal. Like, you don't know when it's a child's going to be hurt, or you're going to be stuck, or whatever.
It's the littlest things too. My parents make fun of me, and some of my siblings do too, because we'll go somewhere like even Bear Lake or somewhere, and someone would fall and get hurt, or something would happen. I'd be like, don't worry, and I'd pull out my first aid kit, and they're all like, you're always prepared. But I'm like, I would rather be in a storm and thrive in it, not just be in it, but thrive in it. So I understand that though, because there's moments too, I'll like go to the store or something will happen, and I'm like, oh, I have this in a bag, but it's in another bag. I'm not prepared for it. And you can't be prepared for every single little moment, but trying to be prepared and putting the effort in it, I feel. So then, is
that your best advice? What's your best advice to be prepared, both temporal and spiritual?
Oh, I get this a lot from people that they have a lot of fear when it comes to prepping, and sometimes they don't prep because there is so much fear.
It's like overwhelming.
It's overwhelming, or they'll be like, there's so much to do and I don't have the money for it, or I don't have the time, and I just say, just do your best. And I'm like, God, he loves effort. He loves to see that we are trying. And as long as we're trying and doing what we can, he'll provide. He will provide for us. So my best advice is just start now. You know, it doesn't have to be extravagant and get started, you know, get everything at once. It took me 3 months to put together 72-hour kits. And that's okay. As long as you're starting and you're trying, all will be well.
That is great advice. I actually felt like such a calm when you said that too. Like I really did, because I get really overwhelmed by that stuff. So that was, you're right. You just do your very best and he makes up the difference. I've seen that so many times in my own life. Thank you so much for being here to share all that.
Thank you for inviting me. I've loved being on here.
Yeah, you're such a great person.